This is the Master Marketer Show, powered by Proofpoint Marketing. Each week, we explore the mindsets, skill sets, and tool sets the top B2B marketers use to drive results. Gain actionable insights, one masterful, revenue-generating success story at a time. Let's get started.
Welcome back to another episode of the Master Marketer Show. Today, I've got Mark Raffan here with me, the founder of both Content Callout and Negotiations Ninja. And we're going to be taking a slightly different spin on marketing today, if you will. We're going to be talking about how to use negotiations concepts to improve your marketing. So, Mark, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
So let's just dive right in. Kind of maybe set the stage for you as well and for our listeners. Like, I think a lot of marketers have read, Chris Voss's book on negotiation. And I'm curious to maybe start there a bit in terms of what are your thoughts on it? And then maybe we can kind of go from there.
I like it very much. I think Chris is a great guy. He's been on my show 2 or 3 times, and we agree on a lot of things. There's a couple of things that philosophically we disagree on, mainly because of our backgrounds. He's sort of from the hostage negotiation perspective world. I'm from the business negotiation perspective world. So we come at the same problem a little bit of a different way, but overall we're aligned on 98% of the things that he talks about.
So I'd love to dive into that. Maybe like, what are the things that you disagree on based on your background? I think that'd be good for everybody to know.
So the title, for example, Never Split the Difference, which is basically another way of saying like never compromise, makes a ton of sense from a hostage negotiation perspective, right? If someone's holding 10 people hostage, you can't say kill 6 and I'll have 4. That's not going to work in a hostage negotiation situation. But in a complex business negotiation, sometimes you have to make compromises on parts of the deal in order to make the overall deal work. So you may, the best example is limitations of liability. Generally speaking, in a limitation of liability discussion between 2 large organizations, where both of them need something from the counterparty, neither of them walks away from a limitation of liability discussion feeling good. Both parties kind of walk away going, this is a bit more risk than I wanted to take on in this contract, but in order to get the overall deal to work, we're willing to make the compromise on the limitation of liability to take on a little bit more risk in order to make the big deal work. So that's probably our biggest disagreement. And I can see totally from his perspective why that may not necessarily work from his worldview, right? That just doesn't apply. But in like a complex business deal, sometimes you have to take a little bit of pain to get a lot of pleasure.
Most people wouldn't think that there's any commonalities, or there are any commonalities between negotiations and marketing. And you were just starting to tell us, well, it's really a lot of the same principles around persuasion and influence, and really more of a one-to-many versus a one-to-one. I will let you take it from there.
You're entirely right. So in negotiation, what we're trying to do is we're trying to influence and persuade someone to make a decision for an agreement or a contract or do something that we want them to do, right? We're trying to get someone to move in a certain direction, to make a decision on something. In much the same way in marketing, we're trying to do the same thing, but we're trying to do it in scale, right? So we're trying to get someone more likely to move in a certain direction, more likely to make a certain decision. We use many of the same principles and practices. If you look at any of the work of Daniel Kahneman or Robert Cialdini or any of these sort of godfathers of persuasion and influence, we use the same things in negotiations. Perfect example is social proof, right? So on a website, you would look at a website and go, okay, here's some testimonials from a few different companies. Here's some logos of companies that I recognize. In negotiation, we may do exactly the same thing in a business deal where we say, we've done a similar deal with XYZ companies and therefore you can trust us. So the same principles of influence, the same principles of persuasion are often being used between both. How you show those are different, but the principles are the same. So you may show authority, for example, different than in marketing than you would in negotiation. And a lot of marketing helps the negotiator, whomever is negotiating that deal, the salesperson or whatever, have the credibility that they need to be able to close that deal and to be able to move that conversation forward. The principles are the same. How it's delivered is just different.
So I want to talk about some of the delivery differences, but before we jump into that, one of the things that comes to mind, especially since we're talking mindsets at this point, is I think a lot of people who read Kahneman and Cialdini and Chris Voss's book, I often see they take away the wrong things in terms of they kind of take away, like, for them, persuasion is, well, my job is to convince you that this is right for you kind of thing, sort of like force feeding stuff where based on what you're describing, and I'm sort of putting words in your mouth to a certain extent, but I don't think that that's what you believe. So maybe kind of if you can expound a little bit on the mindset that somebody needs to have around persuasion and influence to make this work for them.
Yeah, I mean, look, like anything, all of these powers can be used for good or used for evil. And I think a lot of it starts with intent. So if you can have the right intention going into a negotiation conversation, which is, hey, I'm going to try and build and drive value between both of our organizations, or in a marketing conversation, the same thing, I'm going to try and build and deliver value at scale to my potential customers. That's where I think a lot of it really changes. Where it becomes sort of like gross and slimy is where the intent is to manipulate, and the intent may not be to drive value. The intent is just to take money without the provision of value. And so that's where it can get a little bit dicey. But I think overall, the principles are essentially the same.
Yeah, no, I think, well, to maybe emphasize what you just said, I think where I see oftentimes people going wrong is it's not manipulation. Like persuasion and influence are not manipulation. It's not one and the same. And oftentimes that's how people, like that's where you see like the gimmicky marketing, and things like that, and the bait and switch and the clickbait and all that kind of fun stuff.
Yeah, and let's be clear, persuasion and influence can be used to manipulate, but I think it all begins with intention. And it depending on who is doing it, may also dictate how you are viewing what's being said to you. Like there are master con men, for example, that come off as super genuine and super sincere. And then only later, when you've lost all your money, do you realize, hey, this person was just in it to take everything from me. And so I think it's sometimes very hard to distinguish between the two. The ultimate, I think, driving difference is value provision. So as long as there's value provision and value creation, then it makes a ton of sense.
So let's maybe dive into this a little bit deeper in terms of how does somebody use some of these core principles of negotiation in their marketing? I mean, you mentioned one specifically on social proof, but let's maybe dive into a few others.
Yeah, so I mean, I could give you the standard, Cialdini's 6 principles of influence, for example, but let's try and stay away from that. Maybe let's harken back to something earlier. none of these ideas that we use in marketing or negotiation or sales, anything that requires influence or persuasion, is anything new. This has been done for thousands and thousands of years. Aristotle came up with it when he wrote rhetoric, for example, right? Like he said, in order to make something persuasive, you have to have logic, logos, you have to have pathos, which is the emotional appeal of something, you have to have ethos, which is your ethical credibility, and you have to have kairos, which is timing. So it's not like this is any new stuff. If you focus on those fundamentals of, hey, there's got to be a logical reason why someone should make a decision, and then there has to be an emotional decision as well, because very few people make decisions based purely on logic. So how do we drive someone's emotions to help them make an emotional decision with that logical decision, because we know that emotions are more powerful? And then how do we show that we have the credibility to be able to carry that argument, to say this is a valid argument, this is a good decision, therefore you should make that decision? And then when is the right time to be able to do that? Timing is a little bit more challenging, because you may not necessarily know when someone's right time is until you have a conversation with them, or you understand their buying cycle. And understand when decisions might be made within that organization, which is a particular challenge for a lot of marketing people. So the marketing people can often deal with the first three parts of that conversation, right? They can deal with the logic, they can deal with the emotion, they can deal with the credibility, but then it's incumbent upon the salesperson to basically do the slam dunk on the timing, right? Did we get the timing right, and can we deliver at the end? So I think that's where a lot of the foundation needs to start. First, thinking very, very carefully about logic. Why should my target buyer, this target persona, make this decision? That's at scale. And then on the individual basis, you're dealing with that person. What is the logical reason this CFO should make this decision, or this CMO should make this decision? Then emotionally, why? Like, what's in it for them? What's the emotional appeal that they're actually trying to get to? And then obviously credibility comes down to your authority and social proof and all of those things that Cialdini spoke about when it came to influence, like how you like me, what kind of relationship we have, do we have consensus and social proof, do you like all of that kind of stuff still matters.
Definitely. I like what you said around timing. And it's interesting because I think you see a lot of marketers kind of, I would say, falling into the trap of trying to time the market, if you will, right?
Yeah.
Which, I mean, anybody on the finance side says, don't try to time the market. That's literally impossible. It's the same thing in marketing,
it's
right?
True. Like, you can't do that. Like, how do you know when's the right time for the customer to take action? You don't know, which is why you always have to be on, right? That's why awareness marketing and brand marketing is so important, because if they have no idea who you are, you're not even a part of the conversation, right? Like, you don't even come up in deliberating between who's going to do this and who's not going to do this. So anyone who says brand isn't important and you need performance marketing before you need brand, I think you're insane. Like, there's no way your performance marketing is going to hit the right timing every single time. You have to have brand.
Yeah, and I mean, the argument that I would even make is that the way performance marketing is done and the way performance is measured needs to change to align more to, demand and brand, rather than, did I get the right contact at the right time kind of thing. Because that's in my mind at least, a fool's errand. It's like the equivalent, again, like of trying to time the market from a financial perspective.
I agree. I'm not saying you shouldn't have demand and I'm not saying you shouldn't have performance marketing. Those are important, don't get me wrong, but oftentimes people make it a either or conversation instead of a this plus this conversation, which is crazy. Like, you can't make it an either or conversation.
So let's maybe flip it around a bit and talk about what are some of the biggest negotiation pitfalls you see marketers falling into.
Lack of preparation and assumptions. In negotiation, as in marketing, we fail to prepare because we are reactive to the needs of, let's just say, financial targets. So we might say, hey, we have to react to this change in the marketplace instead of responding to what may end up happening as a result of our preparation. And that reactionary approach is often very, very, very dangerous. Instead of like actually coming up with an idea, testing the idea, running the idea and seeing if the idea works, we react to every news story or everything that comes up, and we make crazy assumptions that, the market is responding this way and therefore we should do this. That may be true in some circumstances, but the vast majority of the time, whenever we make reactionary responses, it puts us into a very costly position because we end up making costly decisions based on assumptions. And negotiation is the same. In negotiation, the worst thing you can do is make an assumption. Now, let me flavor that a little bit better. The worst thing you can do is make an assumption and not verify whether or not that assumption is true. So it's okay to make assumptions as long as you also put in the work to verify, was my guess correct? Was my assumption correct? And if it wasn't correct, let's stop doing that. That's dumb. Move things in a different direction. But so many people make assumptions and then go forward with those assumptions without even verifying it. Like sometimes in negotiations, people will assume what the needs and wants of the counterparty are, and then make a negotiation plan based on those needs and wants without first checking whether or not their assumptions of those needs and wants are in fact correct. And it's okay to assume the needs and wants of the counterparty, but you do actually have to ask them at some point, what are your needs and wants? So you have to verify. In much the same way in marketing, if we don't do research, right, we assume the persona acts a certain way or does a certain thing or responds a certain way without actually talking to those people, that's crazy. So it's okay to make assumptions, but then you've got to vet that, right? You've got to verify, is this going to work?
So if we talk skill sets that somebody needs to have, customer research is top of the list.
Research and just your ability to ask good questions and make sure they're not leading questions. Like a lot of questions we ask in surveys with marketing are really leading questions. We might say something like, how good was your experience? You're presupposing the experience was good. So now we're rating it on a scale of good to amazing instead of how was your experience, and then giving them like terrible, okay, and good as responses. In the same way, in negotiation, if we lead the counterparty with a specific response, we're not getting accurate data to give us information about how we need to move the conversation. So not asking leading questions is really important to both parts of this business.
So let's maybe talk about your process a bit in terms of what does somebody need to do to, as much as possible, avoid making the wrong assumptions?
Ask good questions. And do as much research. There are always going to be unknowns. And that's an unfortunate reality that we have to deal with in marketing and negotiation. There are some things that may never be known. In fact, there are some things that the customer doesn't even know about when we say, we know, does the customer know what they need and want? Maybe they don't, right? They know they have a problem and they know they need a solution to that problem, but they don't know what components of a particular solution may look like. And sometimes we imbue our components into that solution without first checking whether or not it's something that would be valuable. So your ability to ask good questions to your customer or to the counterparty in the case of a negotiation is is a skill set that must be developed. And really, it's a skill set that is built on a characteristic, which is curiosity. So your ability to be curious and to nurture your curiosity may be the single most important thing you can do to become a good marketer and a good negotiator.
Yep. No, one of the things I was going to ask you, I have a note written down, which is, a lot of, it's in Chris Voss's book, and in general, like a lot of what customer research talks about is it's all about listening, right? Not just not hearing, but actually actively listening and trying to understand the other. And that's the
and not just listening for what's being said, but what's not being said, right? Because the customer may give you an answer, but you've got to now determine, did that answer satisfy the question? So did I actually get the information that I needed to make a decision based on the answer that I got? And if you didn't get enough information or quality enough information, your job is to keep asking different questions to get better quality information. And at some point, you're going to get there, but most people stop. Most people, because they're process oriented, they've got like a checklist in their head where they say, I ask a question, they gave me an answer, check, move on to the next question. No, maybe you didn't get the right answer. Maybe you didn't get as good of an answer as you would like. And maybe the quality of the information isn't good. Like maybe one of your questions in marketing is, how did COVID-19 affect your business? Or how is the current economy with impending recession affecting your business at a 9.1% inflation rate? And they might say, well, we're struggling. Well, what does that actually mean? If you just take that at the surface level, it could mean anything. Does it mean they're mentally struggling? Does it mean they're financially struggling? Does it mean they've had to lay off employees? Does it mean their marketing isn't working and they need to find a way to make it work in this market? Does it mean their A/B tests are generating different results and they don't know what that means? Like, it could mean anything. And so our job is to not stop there, right? When we hear, I'm struggling, what does that mean? I need to find out more information about what's actually going on, because there are two things that could happen. There could be a risk that I'm not aware of, or there could be an opportunity that I could take advantage of. And unless I actually probe and find out what's actually going on in that person's head or in that person's business, I'm going to be continuing to make assumptions.
For sure. And you mentioned also listening to what they are not saying, and I relate that to, I have a design background, and negative space is just as important as the positive space, and I think it's making good use of that and understanding again what they're not saying, like you mentioned, is oftentimes even more important than what they are saying, and it can lead you down that like a totally different path than you thought you were going to go and make a completely different assumption. Can you think back, because nobody's perfect, a time where maybe you didn't ask the right question and it made you make the wrong assumption and you went completely astray and did the wrong thing?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've had several occasions where I've asked a question that was a leading question, or I've asked a question where I didn't understand more information and it generated terrible results for me. I'll give you a negotiation example and a marketing example. So a negotiation example, I was once negotiating a service agreement at one of the organizations that I used to work for a long time ago, and I asked the question around quality of service. And I asked the question around, how do we improve the quality of service? And they said, well, you need to do these things. And we did those things, but what I didn't think about was the risk imposed on the business of doing those things. Or the extra effort that would be required to do those things, or the cost of doing those things. And what we found was the cost of doing those things far exceeded the need for the increased quality of service that we were looking for, and it cost us a heap of money. That's a very dangerous situation to be in. We lost a lot of money on that. The opposite of that, or not the opposite, a similar kind of experience on the marketing side of things is where we ask a question of like, who is your target persona? And they say CFOs. And then we take that at face value. Well, CFOs for who? CFOs for Fortune 1000 CPG companies located in the northeast quadrant of the United States, because those CFOs are different than many others, than CFOs for SaaS-based organizations that are Series A or B. And they make very different decisions. So when you say CFO, that could mean a bunch of different things. And when you take that at face value, you're going to make a whole bunch of assumptions that are completely wrong. So how the quality of your question determines a lot of different things. And by the way, your customer may not have gone through that depth of question before, and it's probably going to elicit a lot of thinking on their part, and it's going to be a lot of work, and they're going to be very resistant to it. So you're going to have to guide them through that process.
There's a couple of things you mentioned in terms of, I kind of relate this to, trust but verify. You talked about.
Yes.
You should be making assumptions, but you need to verify that those assumptions are accurate. And right now we've kind of been talking about, doing customer research to verify that. What else are you doing outside of talking to stakeholders and customers to verify some of these assumptions?
Just sort of basic research that anyone can do on the internet, right? So where is the market? Who's making the decisions? Listening to podcasts like this, going on to financial websites to be able to determine what the financials of a particular company are, what they budget towards marketing on an ongoing basis, what the churn rate is, whether they can afford to do business with us. All of those kinds of things need to be researched as well. So just sort of basic things that anyone can do. But so often we don't do it because we default to assumptions, because assumptions are easier because there's less work. The problem is that the result of less work at the beginning means significantly more work at the end.
Yep. Yeah, and the other thing that I'd maybe expound on too is like a lot of the times your customer thinks they know what they know, but they really don't, right? So like your example of, well, it's CFOs, or even they might get more explicit. It's like, well, it's CFOs in, med tech organizations in the Northeast. Okay, cool. Let's verify that by actually looking at your CRM and see who your best customers are. And what you might find is, well, it's actually not med tech, it's manufacturing, or it is med tech, but they're in in the Raleigh-Durham triangle rather than the Northeast, or whatever. Like you might find something that is totally unexpected to them because their opinion has been biased by recency, for example, by, our two latest biggest deals have been
who they want their customer to be.
Or who they want, exactly.
Is this your target customer, or is this who you want your target customer to be? And that's a big difference. It could be a huge difference.
And then the question there is, if it's who you want the customer to be, and it's like, well, why do you want that to be your customer versus who is currently your customer?
Right.
Like, what's wrong with these people that you want to go this route? Like the business strategy is so critical to that research, right? So we talked a bit about mindsets. We talked a bit about skill sets. Tool sets I think might be a little fuzzy here, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Like what tools do you use either to do the research or to, put together your ICP or persona documents, or I don't know, even things like what books do you recommend that people read? Things like, what are the tools that people should leverage to get better at this?
On the negotiation front, the negotiation there's a spectrum of negotiation, right? So you could have everything that's super collaborative, like the Harvard program on negotiation, everyone hold hands, sing kumbaya, win-win. And then on the other side of that spectrum, you've got the start with no competition style negotiation, sort of Jim Camp style. Both of those are fantastic. And then there's everything in between. All of them have really good information, and I would highly recommend that no one adhere to a specific negotiation ideology, because many of these things in negotiation and even in marketing can become almost like these weird pillars of belief, like religion almost.
Dogma.
Where people
Yep.
say, yeah, it's like a dogma. Exactly. It's like dogma where people are like, we don't deviate from this one method, which is crazy, right? Like, you must be absorbing other information, otherwise you're missing something. And in much the same way as in marketing, right? Like I know that dark social, for example, is really, really popular on social, right? Everyone's like talking about like, how are you reaching your customers on dark social, and like it's impossible to show attribution for dark social, but it's so important, and it's become like a religion. And everyone's like, no, you should not have gated content on your website. That's the worst thing in the world you can do. And I'm like, hey man, it still claps, right? It's still part of what you should be doing. The new thing that comes up that it helps you to reach more people, sure, absolutely, you should look at that. But that doesn't mean that the other stuff is no longer relevant. And so it's just strange to me that people throw out the baby with the bathwater as soon as they find the new hot thing, And so I think all of the things that we do in both negotiation and marketing are still good. It's just another tool that you can use in your toolbox, whether it's, classic technical SEO that still works, by the way, and still counts. Classic content marketing. Sending brochures to doors in a neighborhood. Direct mail marketing still works under the right circumstances. And I just think it's, depending on the situation that you're going into, will depend on what tool you decide to use. So for those of you that are listening here thinking, I need to get on dark social, well, maybe you do. Maybe you could also use something else that's been proven to work over and over and over again. Depending on the situation that you go into. If you approach every business negotiation as a hostage negotiator, it's not going to work every time. If you approach every hostage negotiation as a business negotiator, it definitely won't work every time. So it really, you've got to utilize all of these tools for the right circumstance that you're going into.
Yeah, what you're bringing up, I think, is actually really, really important. I try to remind people of that as much as I can on LinkedIn specifically, and just clients and whatnot, which is, you have to be careful about who you take advice from, not because they're trying to lead you astray or because their advice is bad. It's just their situation could be different, right? So the
right.
Yes. And look, most of our clients, we talk about dark social and lack of attribution in certain things and community and all that stuff, and it plays a lot. However, when you're in a highly regulated, I'll say old school industry like energy and utilities or banking, you talk to these, I'm not talking about financial services like SaaS, fintech. I'm talking traditional banking. And I'm talking about the utilities or the oil and gas companies and things like that. Others like, healthcare, even maybe not insurance, but others in the healthcare space. Like you talk to them, and a lot of their leaders still, to this day, take a lot of influence and get a lot of their information from trade pubs.
Yeah, absolutely.
They still do. And if you talk to people in the SaaS space, it's like, oh, that's blasphemy. It's like, well,
yeah,
you know what? The 60-year-old banking exec doesn't give a shit.
Right? Like,
exactly. No, it doesn't mean you shouldn't look at doing these other things because, well, guess what? There's going to start being churn, and the 60-year-old executive is soon going to be the 40-year-old executive that wants to buy in this different way, and they're now the influencers and all this stuff. So, yes, layer it in, but don't forget about these other things, right? Or these more old school, quote unquote, tactics like, direct mail. Well, guess what? Now you have a lot more data to funnel into your direct mail campaigns than you ever did before. So they could still work, and you can, you can get really, really creative with them and make it work better than some of your other channels. And they play in spaces like retail energy, for example. I was in a retail energy startup a while back. We did. Guess what? We did both door to door and we did direct mail. They worked insanely well. Right. No, this was 2017 to be fair, but or 2016. Yes, whatever. But still.
Yeah, it depends on each situation that you're going into, and it depends on the market that you play in, and it depends on the geography that you play in. Right? Like it's. Yep. Yeah, I would just urge people not to be dogmatic. Right, like don't get married to a particular idea, don't get married to a particular tool. There are parts of all of the things that we do that are still valid and are still important. Like, here's an example. Like, I think win-win negotiation is the biggest lie that's ever been told in the negotiation world. But that doesn't necessarily mean that I don't appreciate all of the things that went into that original idea. There's a lot of those things that are really, really good. Like, trying to be collaborative and trying to understand the interests of the counterparty and taking time to formulate an alternative, and like all of those things are still really, really good. I can still believe that the idea is misleading and appreciate the tools that are used to do that thing. And I think a lot of people get stuck on like, well, if one part of this doesn't work, then we need to throw everything out. True. There may be parts of it that are really, really great and you can still use.
So let's maybe tie this all together in terms of, all right, I am listening and I'm buying the fact that negotiation has a lot of similarities in marketing. I can use negotiation techniques to persuade and influence. I need to know how to do customer research better. Great. I'm buying what you're selling. Can you give me an example of where you've done these things well? Maybe describe them in a little bit more detail of what exactly you did and what the output looked like. And let's talk about some results.
Yeah. We applied it to our own business because we believe in it so much. So if you look at the content call-out business and you look at the Negotiations Ninja business, both of those businesses are built on building authority and building credibility within the industry. Both of them have podcasts. The experts in their field as guests on those podcasts, that is a great way to build piggyback authority. Like when you speak to an expert, you become the expert, and it's how the market views you. And then also we utilize social proof extensively in both of those businesses. This has worked with some of the top organizations on the planet, so has the content business. And we tell people as much, right? So we build authority and credibility into everything we do. We also show logical reasons why you should work with us, right? Here's a case study. Here's on how to do these things. We also tie into the emotional appeal of people. So we say, you will get more of this stuff and that will make you feel better when you do all of these things. So we use a lot of the same principles across both of our businesses that seem totally different to each other, but are very, very similar in a lot of different ways. I mean, we built up Negotiations Ninja through the thought leadership marketing of that business. And now we've done exactly the same thing with content callout. So it's a lot of the very, very similar.
One of the things, slight tangent, I suppose. You mentioned, thought leadership and podcasts and things like that. And earlier in the conversation, you talked about this sort of dogmatic presence of dark social and that it's hard to measure. I'm big into measurement, not attribution. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on, okay, how have you been measuring the success of these thought leadership activities? We'll just lump them all together into thought leadership.
I mean, a classic way on podcasts is just to measure listens, right? Like, so measure listens in terms of volume, but then also measure who is listening to those things and reaching at, like, it's laborious, but reaching out to people on DM. Have you heard of this show? And would you listen to it? And would you give me some feedback? And what did you think? That's been a big reason why both of those shows have done well. And that's painful.
If I could stop you right there, just ask a clarifying question. So do you have that as part of your, we'll call it your part of your like business development process where you're just reaching out to people like, hey, have you heard of the show? Curious to know what you think about this episode or whatever?
We do direct, like complete direct message on LinkedIn to say, hey, are you following our stuff? Do you know about this?
Is this to followers or is this to cold?
Everyone.
Okay.
To everyone that is or an influencer of that target persona. So if I think that you are going to buy negotiation services like training services, or you influence someone who may buy negotiation training services, I want you to listen to my show. Because at some point you are going to refer someone in your organization of power to say, holy shit, did you hear this episode that Mark did with XYZ person on this thing? It's amazing. And then more people listen to it, et cetera, et cetera. Same thing is true for the content business, right? Reaching out to content marketers and people who run content departments, VPs of contents and CMOs to say, are you listening to the show? We spend a lot of time and a lot of effort building brand because we know that the life cycle of these businesses is going to be really, really long. And so we're very comfortable knowing that it's okay to invest in brand, knowing that we're going to collect on brand development much later. Yes, it delivers results now, but the vast majority of the income that we're going to get from brand development is only going to happen in 3 to 5 years, and potentially even longer than that conversation. So we're in a unique position in that we don't have any outside investors looking for immediate. So it's okay to invest in it because we know that it's going to deliver results. Like Coca-Cola doesn't immediately start building brand and then 2 months later, like that company was started in the early 1900s, right? Like it's, and people that say, well, they're direct marketing. Nonsense, please, let's cut the shit, all right? It's absolutely got to do with brand. So we're absolutely fine with investing in all of those things if it means we're going to deliver results 5 years from now.
Yeah, that long-term time horizon definitely makes a huge difference. We're in the same boat. Going back to what you're talking about, if we can get into the weeds a bit on, sure. I don't know if you could share an example message that you would send to a cold prospective customer. You've never interacted with them before. How do you reach out to them and ask them, hey, have you heard of us? Do you listen to our show? Like, what's the message?
That is literally what I say. I don't overcomplicate.
Okay.
It. So I reach out and I say, hi, whomever, let's just say it's Jenny. Hi, Jenny. You may or may not know about the Content Call Out podcast. We interview guests like Robert Rose and Joe Palizzi and blah, blah, blah. So we build social proof into that first reach out. If you're interested, we would love to have you as a listener. Here is a link that can help you to get there. Let me know if you have any thoughts. And then we send a follow-up message a month later, not too soon, a month later to say, hey, did you listen to the episode that I sent you? What did you think? Was it interesting? And then we send a message a month later saying, thanks so much for the feedback, blah, 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 right? So it's very much about that sort of, here's the social proof, here's why you should listen. And then from there, we can start the conversation of like, what about that did you find interesting? Are you experiencing similar problems in your business? Oh, you're not? What are some of the problems that let's have a conversation. Why don't we schedule a Zoom call? Blah, blah, blah. Right? And then we have made the mistake of going for the sale right away. I think we've all made that mistake, right? But now we're very much long-term focused of like, okay, if you listen to the show, great. We've gotten in, we're having a conversation.
Yep. Awesome. Well, Mark, I think you've shared a lot of great things in terms of mindset, skill sets, and tool sets. Is there anything else around negotiation, how it influences marketing that maybe we haven't touched on that you want to share with the listeners?
Oh, there's a ton. There's a ton that we still need to talk about, but I don't want to take up too much of your time. Maybe we could do a round 2.
Sure. Let's give everybody a preview. What could round 2 look like?
I think we can really get into the weeds on what are the actions you could take that drive persuasion. So what body language do you need to change? How do you need to change your words? How do you need to frame your questions? All of that, I think we could get into the weeds on.
Awesome. And what about, that sounds like that's more on the, we'll call it research and sales side of things. What about the marketing side of things?
Same thing applies. How are you showing up to your customer? How are you changing your copy? All of that still applies.
Okay. Let's do that. We can schedule round 2 and dive into some details.
Sounds great, man. I'm looking forward to it.
Awesome. Mark, before we do that, totally forgot. We have a lightning round that we usually go through. So let's do that quick. What is the metric that you use to measure marketing success?
Sales. Yeah, am I getting sales? And if I'm getting sales, then I'll keep investing. But I also know that I'm not going to get sales right away. So I've got to invest heavily in order to get those sales, and I'm okay with that. I'm okay with a delay in sales if I can invest heavily in my marketing success. But that's because we believe so strongly in brand. Sales is the ultimate metric of success.
What is your least favorite business word or phrase?
What is my least favorite business word or phrase? Probably, let's circle back. I really hate that.
I don't think I said that in this conversation yet.
And it's okay, right? And win, like, let's create a win-win negotiation. I hate that. It's so ambiguous.
You've named a whole bunch just throughout this conversation, but maybe more specifically, who is an influencer that you follow on LinkedIn? On the marketing side.
On the marketing side of things, I really love the consistency of Robert Rose for content marketing. So I follow a lot of his stuff. On the negotiation side of things, I tend to follow a guy by the name of Gary Nesner quite a bit, and Jack Schaefer. And then anyone that's sort of an academic on the persuasion and influence side, I do a lot of, but they're not on social media. I just read their books or their papers.
Which brings me to my next thing. Favorite business or marketing book?
Favorite business marketing book, anything that Joe Palizzi has written. And favorite business negotiation book is You Can Negotiate Anything by Herb Cohen.
Very nice. And last question is, what is something that people wouldn't be able to find out about you through your LinkedIn profile or your social presence?
I like to lift heavy things and put them back down again.
Very nice. Powerlifting, or what are we talking about?
Just anything in the weights area. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, Mark, this has been a pleasure. We'll figure out a time for round 2 and dive into some of these details. Where can people find you if they want to reach out?
Easiest place is LinkedIn, man. Just search my name, Mark Raffan, on LinkedIn, or look at my companies, contentcallout.com or negotiations.ninja.
Awesome. Thanks, Mark. Appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me, man. I appreciate it.
Thanks for joining us on another episode of the Master Marketer Show. We'll be back next week with more B2B marketing success stories. Visit our website, www.proofpoint.marketing, for the full episode library, complete with show notes, guides, templates, and more. Make sure to follow Proofpoint Marketing on LinkedIn and YouTube so you never miss an episode. Listen every Wednesday wherever you get your podcasts. Until next time.